outspoken British dad, now an American, USA, blasts school board for censorship and other constitutional violations. It really is sad when emigre dad has a better understanding of the Constitution than the collective Democrat Party. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is Blimey, the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. We are the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today's show is sponsored by Mike Lindell and our friends at MyPillow. Let me ask you a question. How are those bath towels treating you? Shrink a little bit so that when you're wrapped around them, not everything's covered up. Take 2 to dry yourself off. They're a little bit scratchy and stiff. Well, MyPillow is offering you a special deal right now. Soft, plush, 6-piece towel set for only $40. That is when you use the code Dr. Duke. That's DRDUKE. Get Towel Nirvana by using the code Dr. Duke, DRDUKE. Visit mypillow.com and save up to 66% on all your other bath needs as well. Again, use the code Dr. Duke. Help support a great American company. Okay, today we start in Pennsylvania, where a former school board member and a former member of the British Empire absolutely destroys an area school board for editing out public comments made condemning critical race theory, censorship. This guy, if every American knew his Constitution the way this new American did, we wouldn't have these problems. Take a listen to this.
If you don't like living in the United States of America, then you can all move to Russia, Cuba, or China. This is the First Amendment. And I will caution you, solicitor. There is a video camera to my left. If you edit this tape, then you're going to have a big legal problem on your hands, because my right to critique your fascism, which is what this is constitutionally protected. There are emails, public record emails, in which the Director of Equity is lobbying and advocating for public comment to be censored in this school district. And you know what? Lobbying for it, advocating for it. We've got the school board president saying she'll do better at hitting the mute button in blatant violation of the Constitution. For her lobbying and her advocacy of unconstitutional censorship, I want you, the school board, to terminate the employment of Dr. Charissa Gibson with immediate effect.
So that is the Pennsbury, Pennsylvania taxpayer named Simon Campbell. And what was interesting is, again, you obviously know he is from England, and he started his public comments talking about how a union member had actually called him a bastard child of Margaret Thatcher. And that really set him off to go down this path.
He loved it.
Well, yeah. And he was talking about, this was a past story, but he had been a school board member, right? So he not only decided, you know what, I'm going to go to the USA, I'm going to become a citizen, and then I'm going to become active in my kids' school system. We have how many Americans who can't even bother to look at their kids' homework at night and say, hey, kids, what you learning about? Right. But this man deserves a full round of applause for actually taking action
dads,
in life.
Dads, what are you doing in your evenings? What are you doing in your evenings is more important than your kids' education? What are you doing in your evenings like this man is doing for his kids' education? How many of you are going to man up and take a seat on a school board? How many are going to man up and tell these school boards what's going on with your kids? We need more of this. We're celebrating here a remarkable immigration story, right? Why is it that it seems more and more that it's mostly immigrants to this country who see what's at stake when American people don't? When immigrants are coming here and warning us, hey, I ran away from this. My country is already doing this. What are you up to now? It's a sad commentary when immigrants know better than we do, and immigrants are more willing to take on these responsibilities than we are. Got to get our acts together, or what's happening to our kids will be completely our fault.
So Campbell's main complaint there, as you heard, was talking about how the school board isn't listening or isn't giving the full story about public comments. So at the school board meetings for March 18th and May 20th, at those school board meetings, they had put the videos of those meetings online. However, they had stated that there had been edits due to content, and it was cited on the website so people could see it. And he's saying, well, what's been cut is the posted comments about parents during public comments being opposed to critical race theory. And so that's why he's calling for the ousting of the Director of Equity and Diversity, Teresa Gibson. And on top of that, if you could go back and watch his entire speech, the whole part about him afterwards being the bastard child of Margaret Thatcher, he then really calls out Benito Mussolini sitting up there, and then that school board member, the president or whatever, gets so offended, and he's like, no, you have to listen to what I say. That's my constitutional right. Because guess what? He understands the Constitution. And again, we go back to Americans. How many of you know anything about the American Constitution? How many of you just want to see it burn? That's pretty much where we're at.
Well, too, I mean, when you extrapolate what this man was saying to the school board, he's 100% right. The same goes at the national level. You have tech companies at the advice of the American White House censoring in exactly the same way they were censoring school board comment, censoring people in this country because they have a different worldview. If you have a different understanding of vaccines, if you have a different understanding about what January 6th, this was not an insurrection. It was not some kind of armed coup. Nobody had guns except the Capitol Police. There was no leader of this movement. There was no standard point here. And yet, to talk about this in any other way than the approved White House way will get you censored on Twitter and on Facebook. This is a huge problem. And what the Americanized Brit is telling you is exactly right. This is First Amendment stuff here. If we can't rally around this, even narrow-minded political ideological hacks, if they don't realize that speech, even on speech that you don't like, has to be protected, it's a very short order before all speech is regulated, including left-wing speech. It's time to speak out. We have the Constitution. Your kids do. There's nothing in the Constitution that allows for your kids to be racialized. There's nothing about school anywhere in our founding documents that would allow these so-called public employees to scapegoat children on the basis of their race. Stand up and stop them from censoring you. Stop them from taking these kind of illegal liberties with your children. The Constitution, the laws of our country are on our side. Time to flex them seriously.
Count them, one. We have one school board, at least in this country, that is taking action against teachers who, instead of teaching history, teach critical race theory. This is happening in Sullivan County, their Board of Education in Tennessee, Sullivan County in Tennessee. They voted 6-1 to terminate a tenured teacher named Matthew Hahn, who was accused of insubordination and repeated unprofessional conduct after he gave multiple assignments focusing on white privilege, but he failed in presenting an opposing view. Yep. Again, let's correct what everyone says. We have to teach critical race theory, but we can't call it critical race theory. We're just teaching history.
Right.
But really, we're teaching critical race theory. And you people who say you're against it, it's because you're a bunch of bigots, and that means we can't teach about race at all. That's not at all. We're saying teach all of it.
Well, we
and
already
allow,
are.
We
allow
have been for
opposing
years. Opinions.
For decades. Yes. We have been teaching slavery. And so this is, you bring up a really important point. I'll let you get right back to that narration. This is ridiculous that, if you don't let us racialize your kids, if you don't let us segregate your kids into guilty, nasty white kids and innocent victim black kids, if you don't allow that in class, you won't let us teach anything about race or gender. And it's just nonsense, like you said before.
Exactly. So what happened here in Sullivan County is district officials pointed to two separate incidents where Hahn violated the Tennessee Teacher Code of Ethics, and it included denying students access to varying points of view and intentionally exposing them to embarrassment or disparagement. Now, Hahn taught the class contemporary issues. Great. He also coached baseball at Sullivan Central High School, and he received a detailed letter of reprimand back in February after assigning students to read an opinion article by Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah.
Yes.
The article then was called "The First White President." I think that's supposed to be Donald Trump.
Yes,
right?
It is.
And of course, this is in the Atlantic. Where else would it be? According to the letter, a parent had complained, citing the article's somewhat angry and hateful opinion towards President Trump, which they say contained words that should not be introduced to our children by a high school teacher. So the article had claimed that Donald Trump would not have been elected president if he wasn't white. And it included words derived from cuckold, a term Coates said is specifically meant to debase by fear and fantasy. The target is so weak that he would submit to the humiliation of having his white wife lie with black men. And Coates then used the word whore and wrote the N-word 8 times, including 6 of them in a single paragraph, because that's allowed, because he can.
See, any extremity and gratuitous use of words like the N-word are okay if you're displaying a radical leftist perspective. If, however, you're Huckleberry Finn or Mark Twain, or you're the To Kill a Mockingbird, then it's got to go. The segregation extends way beyond just pitting white kids against minority kids. It goes to these kinds of hypocritical double standards, right? The N-word is the worst word in the history of the world unless you're black people using it with each other or you're black activists lecturing white kids about their privilege. It is ridiculous. It is unacceptable. It is not age responsive. And what's really good about this is it's not like this was a knee-jerk reaction by the school. They went through a whole series of protocols. They warned him. They gave him chances to reform his behavior. He didn't, and now they fired him.
So what happened then is he was told by the code of ethics that you have to provide various points of view, okay? Varying and credible points of view. And he defended what he did with that assignment by saying, well, those were the words of the president, and I thought that kids were mature enough to handle it.
He also said at one point, there is no other argument about the white supremacist issue, right?
Yes.
White systemic racism.
There is no credible source for a differing point of
right.
view.
So notice his words. We want our teachers to teach multiple perspectives. There is no idea in human history that you can't at least point to multiple perspectives about. But to the progressive left, no, it's our way or the highway. And he literally had the nerve to say there is no credible source against systemic racism. So in other words, that's how the progressives work, right? Anybody who, however intelligent, however well documented, puts together another argument, that's not credible anymore. So this guy really deserved his firing.
So at that point, he appealed and he lost. And then here comes reprimand number 2. So at this time, students were showed a white privilege poetry video, and there were some inappropriate terms and phrases. Let's listen.
Whisking past your ears, what is white privilege? It is the only 5 decades of legal acknowledgement expected to correct 400 years of white transgression. It is crack versus cocaine. Blacks receiving almost 20% longer sentences for the same exact offenses. Like, for instance, a black man without a record is less likely to get a job than a white felon. Or maybe it's because we're lazy and we don't work hard enough. Like, what the 400 years in the same field literally is an incredible resume builder.
Straw broke the camel's back. He was going to be terminated. In the dismissal paper, the board actually stated that Hahn clearly knew that video's content was inappropriate, especially in light of the prior letter of reprimand, because this, again, not his first rodeo. There was more than one student that confirmed that Hahn remarked to the class that playing the video could affect his job status. So he clearly knew going in. He said, but one student was quoted him as saying, "I'm about to get fired, but I don't really care." And guess what? He got fired.
And all because it's impossible if you're a progressive educator to even admit there's another way of seeing things. This is the real crux of what the problem with American education is. According to the left, who completely owns every aspect of education from the top to the bottom in this country, there's only one legitimate answer, and it's theirs.
Now, if you've been watching the show for at least the past couple weeks, you've seen plenty of parents and now even students stepping up to school boards and telling them exactly what they think about how they're not being educated and how it's all about critical race theory and sexualization. But this next story is the one that broke my heart more than any of them. A young girl delivered an emotional speech at her local school board meeting, explaining how the teaching of critical race theory and her teacher's relentless focus on sexuality has affected her. Now, she is a white Indianapolis suburb school girl who was born into an abusive home and who later lost her biological family, and eventually she wound up in a foster home. And she asked her school board how they believe that she benefits from this white privilege.
I was told I have white privilege. How can a child born in an abusive drug and alcohol abuse home who lost her entire biological family that has experienced all forms of abuse and neglect be privileged? If you found a child at 15 months in a home with holes in the floor eating cat poop, would you consider them privileged? Just asking, because when I was told that, I was so upset I cried myself to sleep. We have to stop the stereotypes and bitterness towards groups because it gets us nowhere but divided. I have no friends and can say HSE again has failed me. They are trying to divide us into two groups instead of bringing us together as one. Every day I felt less and less valued as a student and failed every class this past year. Academics are not important here, only how we fail and making sure we learn about sexuality, political topics, and emotional topics that teachers may or may not be able to handle, especially with trauma children like myself. I'm happy to move on and begin a fresh start and hope that this next school will love me for me and challenge me to grow in areas that I'm good at.
This is a story about a young girl who at the age of 15 months was taken out of her home, a home with holes in the floor where she was taken up eating cat poop because there was nothing else and no one there to feed her. This is a young girl whose still trauma to this day haunts her. Her mother had to stand beside her. It took everything she had to stand up and address this group. And what they told her, how do you as a public school begin to heal those kinds of trauma when the first and only thing you say to a little girl like that is, you, young lady, have white privilege?
Yeah, when I first watched this story, I couldn't get through it. So this type of abuse at the hands of our educators, it goes to a point where when is enough enough? Like, we joke around a lot on this show because we have to, but when I see these stories and I think of my own kids now, I'm done. I check out. I'm done with everything they're doing. So
you are looking at her, you are dismissing the very real scars and trauma she will carry with her to her grave simply because of her skin color. And you talk about social emotional learning, you talk about how it's the place of the schools to be arbiters for the parents, to be conduits of all of that empathy that they don't get at home. And what do? You see only the white girl. You see only race. It's a shocking statement. And I hope she's left the school board. She's left the entire thing behind. She's got a new school. Here's hoping that she's treated much better than she was before and not reduced to some kind of racist cipher in the name of promoting social justice.
So we always talk about the innocence of our children and how children are brutally honest, and they are. And so if you can stomach it, go back and watch again and listen to her exact words, because she speaks from the heart and exactly what happened to her experiences even in the school when she's talking about how the science or math teacher is trying to teach me how to be emotionally, and why are they teaching me about sexuality and how to identify. Science and math teachers, again, we've talked about this thousands of times, and it's just like we just keep throwing a dart at the wall and hoping we're hitting the target, but she's hitting it right at the core of everything that we continue to talk about on this show. Our children know what is right and wrong, and they know when to question, why are they doing this to me? And I'm, I guess, proud of her or encouraged by her that she was able to stand up for herself and for, the rest of the school.
Well, it's also disgusting how there is no accountability. She's leaving the school board. She has to leave her public school. That's the one that's closest to her house, the most convenient. She has to leave it because there's absolutely no accountability for imagine if she were a traumatized young black girl and she was told by her teachers, this is all the result of your race. If you weren't black and weren't part of the black race, this wouldn't have happened to you. So get over it. And ignored those claims. And that school would be burnt to the ground and the ashes would be salted forever. But simply because she's white, right? There's no accountability. Nobody on the school board has to say a word. None of the teachers that did this, there's no write-up in their files. This one student lost, no big deal. Mobocracy Week, and we again tip of the hat to Jake Jacobs, the wonderful educator and cultural commentator who has given talk spaces all across the country. The name of his book, Mobocracy, and Jake understood, and so many did the great minds of Western culture understand, just how dangerous mobs were to civilization. We've got mobs in the streets, we've got mobs in the schools, we've got mobs in Congress now who are dead set about reordering and remaking this country. Small groups of very loud mobs get their way. They don't think very well. A mob is a dangerous thing because it has no collective soul, right? It has no collective accountability. People who would never act a certain way by themselves, when you throw them in the midst of 1,500 other people on a street with masks on throwing rocks at police cars, things change, and that's the danger of mobs. So take a look at some of our quotes from Mobocracy. Just one way, before it gets too late, America, you better pay attention to what mobs are capable of. We can't laugh at them anymore. We can't scoff at them anymore. We can't allow liberal cities like Portland and Seattle to underwrite them anymore. The time has come to fight them. David Ignatius, who's a lefty, by the way, wrote, quote, "The framers of the Constitution, the framers hated the tyranny of King George, but they were also afraid of mobs. That's why they put so many checks and balances into our system to guard against the excesses of a government that might be inflamed by public passion or perverted by a dictator's whim," right? Dictators are obvious when you see them. But that mob, public passion, you have every right to protest, but you have no right to burn, no right to attack, no right to vandalize. The American left for the last 3 years have called dangerous and violent left-wing protests peaceful protests, while taking organizations like the Tea Party, whose only offense was being old and white and clean and leaving public parks cleaner than they found them, turning that into dangerous rhetoric. How about this from Calvin Coolidge, a very underrated president in my mind, quote, "The only difference between a mob and a trained army is organization." In other words, these thugs from Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all these other the Young Socialist lobby, all these groups, the only thing that stops them from being a full-blown army is organization. Now, the American army is being taught critical race theory that supports these mobocracies. It's not going to get better. And finally, a quote from the great German philosophy Goethe about mobs. Quote, "There is nothing more odious than the majority. It consists of a few powerful men to lead the way, of accommodating rascals and submissive weaklings, and of a mass of men who trot after them without in the least knowing their own minds." That's the problem with mobs. It's all emotionally based. You have a couple of charismatic leaders, and you've got all of this brain-dead following, all of this young, restless anger ready to be vented without anybody having given it a second thought.
All right. Those are the stories for today. If you have a question for us, please feel free to drop it in the mailbag by emailing askduke@fpeusa.org. And if you enjoy our content, please support our show and join the Patriot Club. Your one-time $99 tax-deductible donation keeps us going. Simply visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us and get signed up today. Now, of course, as a special thank you, we will ship you our signature tumbler.
And that wraps up the show for this day. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, you have to stay educated, my friends. There's no other choice.